Let us see what we are going to learn about in this module. We are going to learn about the significance of the fibers as trace evidence, the different types of fibers that exist, the different methods to collect these fibers, and then in the end, the various methods for the analysis of the fibers. Let us first briefly discuss about the trace evidence that we are going to study in details, that is the fibers. Now, fibers are very fine thread-like structures from fabric and other materials, but these fine materials are actually easily identifiable under a microscope. Now, the fiber examination can then determine whether the fiber is a natural fiber or a synthetic fiber. Now, further, its source can be determined by comparing it with a fiber of a known source. Now, natural fibers are mainly from a plant or an animal source like cotton, silk, etc., while man-made fibers are made from synthetic materials like rayon, nylon, etc. Now, the natural fibers can be easily detected by microscopy, but we know that most of the fibers which are used nowadays are nothing but synthetic fibers. So, accordingly, various methods are employed to analyze them. Now, fiber examination is extremely useful in crime investigation, as these are the trace evidence which can be easily identified. Now, a carpet's fiber or a fiber from a person's clothing can actually indicate the individual's presence on the crime scene. But since fibers are very mobile and lightweight, so they can get easily brushed off, and so it becomes necessary for us to collect the fiber evidence on time to prevent the loss of material or cross-contamination. Now, let us discuss about the different types of fibers that exist. Now, depending upon their source, the fibers are broadly divided into two categories: the natural fibers and the man-made fibers. Now, let us first discuss in brief the natural fibers. Now, natural fibers, they are the oldest fibers known to us. Now, since these materials are made up of cells, they have a better ability to absorb moisture and are thus considered to be very comfortable. Now, so the clothing that directly touches our skin is mostly made up of natural fibers. Now, natural fibers are further divided into two categories. One is the fibers from plant source and the other is the fibers from animal source. So, let us discuss fibers from plant source. Now, the examples are very famous examples of cotton, jute, etc. Now, cotton fibers are commonly used in textile material. The type of cotton, the fiber length, the degree of twist, it actually contributes to the diversity of these fibers. Now, the processing techniques and color application also influence the value of cotton fiber identification. Now, other fibers include jute, linen, etc. The identification of less common plant fiber which is found on the crime scene or on the suspect's clothing would certainly have increased significance. Now, the different types of fibers. Now, let us come to the fibers from the animal source. Now, the animal fibers which are mostly used in textile industries is nothing but it is wool. It is the most common of them. And the most common wool fibers, they come from sheep. Now, the end use of sheep's wool indicates the fineness of woolen fibers. Now, the finer wool fibers, they are used in making clothing, while the coarse fibers, they are used to make materials like carpets. Now, thus, the diameter of the wool fibers, it holds importance in the analysis of fibers from the crime scene. Wool from Angora goat, camel are also found. Other example for animal fiber is silk. Now let us divert ourselves to synthetic or man-made fibers. Now these fibers, they are alternative to the natural fibers. More than 50% of the fibers, they are man-made. They may be originated from natural materials like cotton and some from synthetic materials like rayon. Now, the most common examples of man-made fibers are nylon, dacron, which are followed by acrylic, etc. These are mostly used in garments, foam padding and soundproofing, etc. Now let us come to the most important point, that is, what is actually the significance and use of fibers as trace evidence. Now fibers are a form of trace evidence which are very small and easily detectable and also easily transferable. Now these are very useful in crime scene investigation as they can be identified under a microscope easily. Now there are actually several reasons for considering them as a crucial set of forensic evidence. Now the reasons are they are easily transferred from the clothing of a suspect to that of a victim. They are capable of multiple transfers also, that is, for example, from carpet, bed, etc. to the suspect's clothing. These transfers can further be direct or indirect. By direct transfers, we mean that the fiber is transferred directly from a fabric onto a victim's body. While by indirect transfer, we mean that the already transferred fibers on the clothing of a suspect are further transferred to a victim's body. Fibers vary according to their end use. Further, they exist in huge varieties. Now, a deep understanding of the direct and the indirect transfers is important while reconstructing the crime. Now, whenever two people come in contact with each other, there may be transfer of fibers or there may not be transfer of fibers, but the possibility of transfer of fiber is much more. There are certain types of fabrics also that do not shed fibers very efficiently, while there are some fabrics which can actually hold the fibers very well, and there are further some fabrics which cannot hold the fibers very well. So the construction and the fiber composition of the fabric, the duration and the force of the contact, and the condition of the clothing with regard to the damage are very important considerations while doing the analysis. Now, another important consideration is the time delay between the actual physical contact and the collection of clothing items from the suspect or the victim's body. Now, if the victim is immobile, very little fiber loss will be there, whereas the suspect's clothing will lose the transferred fiber quickly. The possibility of finding transferred fibers on the clothing of the suspect a day after the actual contact had been made will be very remote, depending upon the use and the handling of that clothing. But there are certain drawbacks also for considering fibers as trace evidence. The most important drawback is that they are hard to quantify the rarity of fibers, as no real studies have been done. Moreover, class evidence does not lead to a specific person. Let us come to the different methods of how to collect fiber evidence. Now, a carpet fiber or a person's shoe can indicate the individual's presence at the crime scene. Now, but the fibers, they are very mobile and lightweight, so they become airborne, get brushed off easily, or fall from clothing also. Now, this mobility actually makes timely investigation collection very crucial to prevent the loss of the material or cross-contamination. Although fibers, they can cling to each other or to hair, they can still be easily brushed off. They can be collected from carpet, victim's body, victim's clothing, or suspect's weapon. There are certain precautions which are to be taken into consideration while collecting the evidence. That is, photographs of all the evidence should be taken prior to collecting them. Collect large items such as clothing in separate paper bags. We are not supposed to keep the suspect and victim items in direct contact with each other, which can then lead to cross-contamination. It should be made sure that the carpet, other materials that might have been transferred to a suspect or a victim are all collected carefully. Bedding should be carefully handled to avoid the loss of evidence in the form of fibers. Some of the very common collection methods include individual fiber collecting using tweezers or vacuuming or by tape lifting. Let us discuss about them in brief only. Now, on most of the surfaces, if not all the fibers can be seen with naked eyes. So, using clean forceps and trace papers, then the sample can be removed from the surface. It is then placed on a clean piece of paper and is folded and packaged in a paper envelope or some other packaging bag very carefully, lest the evidence may get contaminated. Then comes the tape lifting. Now, water or methanol soluble tapes are available for the collection of fiber evidence. The tape is applied to the location of the suspected sample, removed and then packaged. Then coming to the vacuuming method, the area where the suspected samples are located are vacuumed in this technique, then caught in a filtered trap attached to the vacuum. These samples are then packaged in a clean trace paper to be submitted to the laboratory. Now, vacuuming is the least desirable of all these collection methods because there is always a risk of cross-contamination if the equipment is not cleaned properly between every use. Now, coming to the most important part of this module, that is the analysis of the fibers which have been collected from the crime scene. Now, fiber analysis is actually a method of identifying and examining the fibers found on the crime scene used by forensic investigators to procure crucial evidence during an investigation. If a fiber exhibits the same microscopic and optical properties as a known fabric, then the fiber could possibly have been originated from the known fabric. Now, although it is not possible to say that a fiber originated from a particular fabric, fiber matches are not that significant. It is actually because of many different types of fibers and fabrics present in nature and many methods of coloring them. The likelihood of finding the coincidental matches becomes very low. But it is still possible to say that a torn piece of fabric originated from another fabric if the torn edges match. There are certain crucial characteristics that make the examination and thus analysis of the fibers very easy. For example, the fiber diameter. Now, the fibers vary in size from 10 to 15 micrometers. The softer materials will have smallest fibers, while the most durable materials will have the largest fibers. Then is the fiber cross-section. Basically, it is the cross-section of the fiber that varies according to the type of the fiber. The natural fibers have their origin from plants and animals and thus look rough at the edges. This feature on examination can actually reveal whether the fiber is natural or man-made. Also, for example, the finer woolen fibers are used for making clothing, while the coarse ones are used for making carpets. So again, the size of the fiber can tell its origin. Coming to the fiber number. Now, the numbers of fibers on the clothing of a victim can be identified as matching the clothing of the suspect is important in determining the actual physical contact. The greater will be the number of fibers, it is more likely that the contact actually occurred between these individuals. Now, coming to the fiber color. Fiber color actually influences the value of particular fiber identification. Often, dyes are used to give colors, so individual fibers may also be dyed before being spun into yarns. Yarns can also be dyed and also fabrics made from yarns. Also, color can be applied to the surface of the fabric as found in printed fabrics. Thus, how the color is applied and absorbed along the length of the fiber are important comparison characteristics. Color fading and discoloration can also lend increased value to a fabric association. Coming to the fiber location now. Now, where fibers are located also affects the value given to a particular fiber association. The location of the fibers on different areas of the body or specific items at the crime scene influences the significance of fiber association. Now, based on the discussion characteristics, let us in brief consider some of the common methods for fiber analysis. Now, fiber analysis does not actually follow any specific laid down procedure. The most common use of fiber analysis is the microscopic examination of both the individual as well as the cross-sectional sample. Other methods include the burning and solubility methods, which are very less used. Fiber analysis is actually not done in university labs because of the lack of required solvents. Apart from visual examination of single fiber with a comparison microscope, some of the methods for fiber examination are scanning electron microscopy. Now, scanning electron microscopy is a method of photography which requires an instrument called scanning electron microscope. This type of microscope uses electrons rather than light to form an image. There are many advantages of using this method instead of light, as it allows a large amount of sample to be in focus at one time. Then comes the atomic force microscopy. This is a method which is carried out using an atomic force microscope. It is an instrument which is used to analyze and characterize samples at the microscopic level. This instrument will allow an analyst to look at the surface characteristics with very accurate resolution ranging from 100 micrometers to even less than 1 micrometer. Coming to the chemical or dye analysis. Now, the chemical analysis will involve the extraction of the dye from the fiber sample and then characterizing and identifying its chemical nature. It is actually difficult to extract a dye from the fiber sample, as these samples are typically small. And it is also made sure by the textile dyers that the dyes, they stay in the fiber. So this method of dye analysis is a destructive method which leaves the fiber useless for further color examination. But still, since some fibers have similar colors, that this chemical analysis becomes a necessity. So let us summarize now what we have studied in this module. In this module, we have studied the different types of fibers, the importance of the fibers as trace evidence, and the analysis of the fibers. Fibers are nothing but very fine thread-like structures from fabric and other materials which are easily identifiable under a microscope. Further, the fiber examination can determine whether the fibers are natural or synthetic. Its source can then be determined by comparing it with a fabric or fiber from a known fabric. Thus, we have studied that there are broadly two types of fibers: natural fibers, which are mainly extracted from plant or an animal source like cotton, silk, etc., while man-made fibers, which are made from synthetic materials like nylon, rayon, etc. The natural fibers are easily detectable by microscopic methods, but most of the fibers used in the garments nowadays are synthetic. So accordingly, various methods are employed to analyze them. Fiber examination is extremely useful in crime investigation, as these are the trace evidence which can be easily identified. But they are very mobile and very lightweight, and thus they can become airborne and get brushed off easily. So it becomes very crucial to collect them from the crime scene on time, so that very less fiber loss is there. Now, carpet's fiber or from a person's clothing can indicate the individual's presence on the crime scene. So the fibers can be collected from the carpet, bed, victim's clothing, etc. But while collecting them, a lot of precautions are to be taken. Some of the common collection methods are use of tweezers, tape lifting, and vacuuming. Now, once the collection has been done, the evidence is packed very carefully while taking for examination. Fiber examination can reveal whether the questioned fiber belongs to the particular known fiber or not. Some of the common methods for fiber analysis include scanning electron microscopy, atomic force microscopy, dye analysis, etc. Out of these, dye analysis is done only when required, as it is a destructive method and thus one has to leave the possibility for further color examination.